Good morning to all of you. I hope you had a good week, and I hope since Tuesday everything is still fine. As you know, before we start, I should tell you we don't really have, as far as our course is concerned, any holiday. I received the email from the president, like you probably did as well, and you could see, perhaps like me, that now we're just taking 2 weekends from Friday to Monday, and since our classes are Tuesday and Thursday, we will not be having any time off for the holidays. This means that we might actually finish early and do more reviews. I'll see what you prefer. But it also means that we have the time to go through all the texts that we need to go through. So we continue today with Hume. As you can see, we're already ahead. We started Tuesday, and we will continue today. We said that at this point, Hume is going to present the 2 points of view, in other words, the empiricist and the rationalist, starting with the rationalist, and then he will give his own view on the question of morals, on the sources of our morals. So let's do that, and hopefully we can finish Hume today. I don't see why not. And next time move on to Plato, and that means we still have Plato and Plotinus after him, and we're done. Let's begin. We are on page 2 of the actual book, which I remind you is printed horizontally. It makes it easier to find in your reader. So on page 2, on the second column to the right. Admittedly, he says, then, there are plausible arguments on both sides of the question. On the side, of course, then, of the rationalist, the nationalist side, and on the empiricist side. So he says, on the side of the view that moral distinctions are discernible by pure reason, there is this line of thought. So Hume is giving us what empiricists say. What rationalists say. Rationalists say, consider the many disputes in everyday life as well as in philosophy regarding morals. Consider the long chains of proofs that are often produced on both sides. The examples cited, the authorities appealed to, the analogies employed, the fallacies detected, the inferences drawn, and the various conclusions tailored to fit the principles they are supposed to go with. Where does all this come from if morals aren't in the domain of reason? Truth is disputable. It's a question of disputing what truth may be, because we can use our reason to do so. Taste isn't, because taste is a subjective thing. So first then, we can say, what exists in the nature of things is the standard of our judgment. What each man feels within himself is the standard of sentiment or feeling. We're not going to read the note. Propositions in geometry can be proved. Systems in physics can be controverted. But the harmony of verse, the tenderness of passion, the brilliancy of wit must give immediate pleasure. No man reasons about someone else's beauty, but we often reason concerning the justice or injustice of someone's actions. In every criminal trial, the prisoner aims first to disprove the accusations about what he has actually done, and second, to show that even if these actions were real, they could be justified as innocent and lawful. Everyone knows that one, so to disprove the accusations about what he has actually done, is settled by deduction, so using reason, of the understanding. How can we suppose that in settling two, so to show that even if these actions were real, they could be justified as innocent and lawful, how can we suppose that in settling that, a different faculty of the mind is employed? Of course, it's also the same faculty, our understanding. Okay? So this is, as far as Hume sees it and can summarize it, the rationalist argument. Basically, what we understand here is that the domain of morals is distinguished from that, or the domain or field of morals, from that of taste. In other words, judgment and art, which Hume also wrote a lot on. They say, the rationalists, we cannot dispute when the question is a question of whether something is beautiful or not. Why? Because what we find beautiful is a question of taste. In a way, very much like some of you may like chocolate and others may not like it. Some of you may like aubergines and others not. Some of you may like aubergine ice cream and others not. It's a joke, of course. I don't think anyone would like aubergine ice cream, maybe in another culture. But anyways, in questions of taste, there is no dispute. So we can say it's subjective. It's not objective. It's a subjective knowledge, so it concerns the individual subject. It does not concern something objective that would be the same for everyone. So we don't fight about it. We let everyone have the taste that they have. On the other hand, when it comes to morals, the rationalists will say, we notice that in questions of morals there's dispute. We actually debate these. Since we do debate them, we use our reason to decide on them. Okay. And another example of that is, of course, what happens in court when you have a criminal. So a criminal tries to disprove the accusations that he has done. Of course, to do so, he has to use a line of arguments, or as they say, according to Hume, to use deduction of the understanding. So, of course, we know deduction is a rationalist work. You deduce from general principles, you deduce from universal axioms of reason different things. So deduction is a very rational work, a work of the understanding, if you like, and so it's a rational question. So when you are proving innocence, which is of course a moral dimension, you are using your reason. And also, if you have committed some action, you try to justify why you committed it. You killed someone, you say, by accident, or to defend someone, or to defend your country, to defend your family. So, of course, once again, you are using the same faculty of reason. You are using deduction to justify yourself. And this is an example for the rationalists that allows them to say that questions then of morality, just as questions also of justice and injustice, because justice and injustice are a question of morality, so they are decided by reason. That means that if we want to write a book on morals, we would have to write it deductively. We have to use reason, and we have to define what is rationally, universally moral or immoral. This is the point of view of the rationalists. It would be also in some way the point of view of Descartes. Someone like Descartes whom we didn't read, of course, but it would be the point of view of someone like Kant that we did read. In the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, for the sake of comparison for you, it's of course a very rationalist way of determining morality. For Kant, what matters, of course, is that the will be good, and the will is good if it follows the right maxim, and the maxim is good when it's under the law of reason. So it is at the end the law of reason that is essential, not the consequences of my acts, but in a way the intention of my act determined by the law of reason. So irrespective of the consequences, if you remember. This is a rather rationalist morals, Kant's. Now, so that's the rationalist argument for you. You can put here number 2 on page 3. We're going to present, or Hume's going to present to us, the empiricist argument. On the other side, says Hume, those who hold that all moral views are matters of feelings or sentiment may say things like this. It is impossible for reason ever to draw moral conclusions. The essence of virtue is that it is amiable, lovable, something we like, we love. The essence of vice is that it's something we hate, it is odious. Could reason or argumentation tell us which items are to be labeled amiable and which are to be labeled odious? Settling in advance that this must produce love and that must produce hatred? What reason can we ever give for the facts about what we love and what we hate, except the basic structure of the human mind? The purpose of all moral theorizing is to teach us our duty, and by presenting the ugliness of vice and the beauty of virtue, to get us into the habit of avoiding one, vice, and embracing the other, virtue. Could we ever expect to achieve that through inferences and conclusions of the understanding, which don't in themselves have any hold on our affections and don't set in motion our active powers? Inferences, etc., reveal truth, but they can't influence our behavior because the truth they reveal are indifferent and don't create either desire or aversion. The note here is okay. Here and in the next paragraph, indifferent means not involving any kind of for or against, obviously. If something is honorable, fair, appropriate, noble, or generous, it takes possession of the heart and stirs us to embrace and maintain it. On the other hand, if something is intelligible, evident, probable, or true, that procures only the cool assent of our understanding. If you extinguish all the warm feelings and attitudes in favor of virtue, and all disgust or aversion to vice, thus making people totally indifferent towards these distinctions, the result will be that morality is no longer a practical study, having no tendency to regulate our lives and actions. So, what is the empiricist side saying? All moral views, every time we have to judge whether something is good or bad, good or evil, right? Any moral views are a question of sentiment, feeling. Why is that, again, empiricist? For the simple reason that sentiment and feeling is always individual, right? You cannot feel pain for me, for example, to think like Wittgenstein. If something hits you, it doesn't hit me. This is a feeling. So we have feelings of pleasure and of pain and others, and the basic one are pleasure and pain. And feelings are individual, So they are a matter of sensation, and sensation is individual, right? So it is feelings that determine whether something is moral or not. It's the personal feeling, the individual subjective feeling about something, not universal conclusions from deductions of reason. The empiricists then say reason cannot use its deductive powers to come to conclusions about morality. No. What it can do, of course, is work towards conclusions on mathematics, perhaps even physics, in science then, and so on. But not in morality. Because in morality, what's important is to be virtuous, and what has to be rejected is to be vicious. So we have to accept and foster virtue and condemn vice. Now, the empiricist says, what is the essence, what is the very characteristic of something virtuous, a virtuous act, a virtuous thought even? Well, virtue is amiable, lovable. So it's a question of feeling. What is virtuous seems to us, we feel that it's something we love, it's something we appreciate, if you like. It's something that we find, we feel good about. And of course the opposite, something that seems to us horrible, ugly even, disgusting, would be vice. So in both cases we are of course using our feelings, right? So morality is a question of feelings. And what should we do? If you notice in that paragraph, the purpose of all moral theorizing is to teach us our duty. How does it do that? What we should do and not do, right? Our duty. By presenting the ugliness of vice. So what is a vice? We should feel bad about it. We should feel it's horrible. And virtue, we should find it beautiful. And what happens then? This is something that our parents, our school then will teach us with time. So it takes a long time, of course. With habit, which reminds us, of course, of Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics. You build virtue through habit. So you get into the habit of avoiding one, you avoid vice, and embracing the other. Okay. Something then a bit connected to Aristotle, with this difference that for, of course, Aristotle, there's a definition of virtue not as something simply amiable, but as the mean, if you remember, between two extremes. Aristotle, right? So if we stay here with our empiricists, virtue is something we have to get into the habit of loving, and vice we have to get into the habit of hating and thus avoiding. Of course, these habits are not a question of universal reason. You don't get used to a deduction. The deduction is always true, it's always there, it has nothing to do with how you feel about something, whether you find it beautiful or ugly. So they have nothing to do with affections, our feelings, how we are affected by things and events and people and thoughts. And you can see the real contrast here in bold letters. What reason does is give you a cool, something cold without feelings, right? A cool assent. To assent is to say this is true. It gives us cool assent. It allows you to work on a mathematical problem, and you show it to someone who knows mathematics, and invariably he will say, yes, this is correct, and I assent. It's the opposite with morals, where it's a question of the heart. So noble, appropriate, fair, generous things, actions, and so on, they affect our hearts. We feel that they are beautiful. We feel they are amiable. We feel they are things that we love. And so they move us. We want to do that. We want to do what is good. And thanks to good education, we have this more and more. So, in other words, morals are a question of feelings, of sensations, empiricism. So we have now the two views. Here's what Hume has to say about them. These arguments, says Hume, and many more that might be produced, of course these arguments were just an example, are so plausible. Notice when he says this, it's both rationalists and empiricists, okay? They are both plausible, acceptable. That I'm inclined to suspect that the arguments on both sides are solid and satisfactory, and that reason and sentiment work together in almost all moral judgments and conclusions. But, he is Hume, the very fine skeptic, if I am right, they enter the picture in different ways. There is the final judgment, which, what does a final judgment do? Pronounces people and actions amiable or hateful, odious, praiseworthy or blamable. There is the final judgment which stamps on them the mark of honor or infamy, approval or censure. There is the final judgment which renders morality an active principle. And this final judgment makes virtue our happiness and vice our misery. Okay, I reread it because it's important. What we get in the end is that there is the final judgment, moral judgment. It says people and actions are amiable or odious, praiseworthy or blamable, stamps on them the mark of honor or infamy, approval or censure, renders morality an active principle, and makes virtue our happiness and vice our misery. Hume continues, this final moral conclusion depends on some internal sense or feeling that nature has made universal in the whole species. For only a feeling could have an influence such as I have described. But we often find that in order to reach now the sentiment or feeling and to pick out accurately the thing the feeling is about, we have to go through much reasoning. And make fine distinctions through that. Draw sound conclusions. Compare things that are not greatly alike. Examine complicated relations. And settle various factual matters. Some sorts of beauty, especially natural beauty, command our affection and approval when we first see them. And if something doesn't have this effect, there's no way for reasoning to remedy the situation and make the item in question more in tune with our taste and sentiment. But there are many kinds of beauty, especially in the finer arts, where one has to use much reasoning if one is to have the right feeling, and the wrong liking for a work of art can often be corrected by argument and reflection. There are good reasons to think that moral beauty is of this latter kind and can't get suitable influence on the human mind unless it gets help from our intellectual faculties. Let's work through this. So, Hume, again, let's look at the final judgment, that is a moral judgment. First, we're able to then judge when we are moral some people and some actions as amiable or odious, praiseworthy or blamable. Amiable or odious, of course, it's a question of feeling. I feel that this is something I would love or something I would hate. Or it is something that I will say is great or something that I will blame as not great, as bad, like being a traitor to one's country. So amiable, odious, question of feeling, empiricism. This judgment also stamps on people, right? So certain people, certain actions, I will say they are honorable, or the opposite of honorable, infamous, horrible, to be despised and condemned, honor. I give them the mark of honor or infamy. I approve or censure them. I say, yes, you should do them, or no, you shouldn't do them. Okay? So, sentiment, feeling of honor, feeling that something is honorable. But also when I approve or censure, this can be something rationalists would do. Something like what Kant later, of course, Kant is after Hume, would say something can be approved if it follows the maxim, of course, and the categorical imperative, if it follows the law of reason. So we can have a bit of both in the second. The final judgment says also, morality is an active principle. The question here, of course, is that we have to enter action. Morality is not something you possess, it's something that in a way you live. And it is an active principle. So it's one. It's something that can be universally applied. There is something also of the rational here. And fourth, this final judgment makes virtue or our happiness and vice our misery. We are happy when we are virtuous, and we are sad, miserable in fact, when we are vicious. Okay. So again, I feel happy or I feel miserable. It can be seen as something an empiricist would say. But I can also speak as a rationalist and say, you have to be deserving of this. And Kant would say, in order to be deserving of it, you have to follow the maxim determined by the law of reason. So, it seems it's a bit different, But let's see. So it seems that it's not settled on one side or the other. So let's see what Hume then says. The final moral conclusion. So when we are actually going to say an act is moral or not, depends on something we feel inside. So there is a feeling. Of course, I have to feel happy. I have to feel that this is honorable. I have to feel that this is amiable or not. Now, I can judge that it's praiseworthy through reason, but I can feel also it's amiable or odious. Okay. So there is a feeling in us. And notice, he calls it on some internal sense or feeling, that nature has made universal in the whole species. We all have, in other words, a moral feeling in us. Because only feelings can have a connection to what is amiable or odious. You can only feel that something is amiable or odious. You can feel this in you. You can feel only happiness, or you can feel miserable. You can feel pleasure. You can feel pain. So there is essentially a feeling involved in morals. We cannot escape it. And every one of us has it for Hume. So I reread, this final moral conclusion depends on some internal sense of feeling that nature has made, or feeling that nature has made universal in the whole species. Why? For only a feeling, he says, could have an influence such as I have described. Only a feeling can be a basis for judgment on something as amiable or odious, as pleasurable or not pleasurable, as leading to happiness, as provoking happiness in me or not. But this being true, Hume says it's not enough. So it means it's not only the question of possessing a universal internal sense, a universal feelings in connection with morals. He says we often find, so we cannot just be empiricists, right? But we often find, he says, that in order to reach this sentiment, in order to start feeling that something is amiable or odious, start feeling that this makes me feel happy, or it gives me pleasure or pain, or it makes me happy or miserable, in order to reach that state, in order to reach that feeling, that in order to reach the sentiment or feeling and to pick out accurately the feeling, the thing the feeling is about. So two things are involved. In order to get this feeling and to choose the object of that feeling, right? So the object could be the action or the person doing an act that I would judge as amiable or odious, as blameworthy or not, etc., as following, as making me happy or sad, as etc. So we need both the feeling, reaching it, and at the same time reaching it alongside or with the right object, person, event, etc. to feel about. So I should feel amiability, I should feel happiness about the right object. Again, reread our notes on Aristotle. There is something of that in Aristotle. You have to be trained to feel happiness, to feel pleasure, rather, at the good act and pain at the bad act. Right? So, we often find then, in order to reach first the sentiment or feeling, to reach the sentiment or feeling, and second, to choose correctly, accurately, the thing that we feel about, this feeling, we have to go through a lot of reasoning. So, we cannot just be empiricists. There is something also of the rationalist there, reason. We have to go through much reasoning, make fine distinctions, which only reason can do, draw sound conclusions. Reason is the only one that uses arguments one by one, drawing conclusion from one to the other. This is work, rational work, or of the understanding. Compare things, of course, it's again rational work, that are not greatly alike. Examine complicated relationships, settle various factual matters, etc. So, in order to have the right feeling for the right object, we need to reason about it. Further distinction is brought then. Hume says, some sorts of beauty, especially natural beauty, right, command our affection and approval when we first see them. So this is not exactly like morals, right? Like if I see a nice jasmine, if I see any kind of flower, I don't need to go through judgments and conclusions and comparing, etc. I know immediately it's beautiful. And if something doesn't have this effect, there's no way for reasoning to remedy the situation and make the item in question more in tune with our taste and sentiment. Okay, so this is something that is not a question of morals, and of course I like or I don't like, I find something immediately beautiful or odious, and so on. But he says there are many kinds of beauty, especially in the finer arts. When we go to painting, when we go to music, etc., there are kinds of beauty where it is important to use reasoning if one is to have the right feeling, right? If I am judging a painting by, by Picasso, anyone who has not studied the history of fine art, who doesn't know that Picasso is a result of so many things, that this work he's doing is beautiful because I trained my delicacy to know, to understand such works as beautiful. I know that, for example, Picasso was going from Cézanne and ending the whole history of perspective. Cézanne would present all sorts of perspectives in one, and Cubism and Picasso was trying to do that as well, and it produces something different, something beautiful, aesthetically to be admired differently. Now, if I don't have this training, I will not be able to discover that beauty. Okay, this is what Hume, of course, means here. But there are many kinds of beauty, especially in the fine arts, where one has to use much reasoning if one is to have the right feeling for the right object, right? And the wrong liking for a work of art can often be corrected. If someone says, oh, this is so ugly, I say, okay, sit down, Let's talk about it, okay? And I explained to you how to understand, how to see the work of Picasso. So a wrong liking for a work of art can often be corrected by argument and reflection. Now, an example of that, if you like something and you shouldn't like it, I can also reason with you and tell you how this is bad. If you like, I don't know, a work done by a very mediocre artist, I can tell you, look, here he's just imitating this guy and he's not doing it very well. I can show you through the history of painting that what he's doing is really mediocre, etc. Okay. There are good reason then, there's a use of reason in order to make the correct judgment in certain cases, to have the right feeling for the right object. Okay? So the right feeling can be, I consider this ugly for this kind of object, or beautiful for this kind of object. And Hume is saying, in the moral questions, this is what we have. So he says there are good reasons to think that moral beauty is of the latter kind, where we have to use our reason, and can get a suitable influence on the human mind unless it gets help from our intellectual faculties. Okay? So what is here the conclusion for Hume is that in the field of morals, we cannot follow empiricism alone or rationalism alone. That doesn't mean they are wrong. It means alone they are not sufficient. We need both feelings and judgment, to be simple. The moral judgment is a judgment about feeling. So it's about how the feeling is to be felt. So it's about reaching the feeling for the right object. And this requires judgment and reason. So finally, I will say, the moral judgment is both a question of feeling and reasoning. Both an empiricist and a rationalist question. Some more distinctions will now be brought about. I will leave them for next time. We will finish then Hume next time. We still have this page 4. And move on to Plato's Republic, to book 10 of Plato's Republic, which will take us, I believe, 2 or 3 sessions maximum. I think 2 sessions will be sufficient. So that means next week we'll almost finish Plato, and we'll dedicate the week after that to Plotinus. So we continue with Hume next time. We continue and finish with Hume next time. And I will talk to you then. You have no homework until we finish. I will talk to you on Tuesday. Have a good weekend.